On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Boston Celtics are regrettably in the NBA Finals again and seem to have an iron grip on the Eastern Conference for many years to come. What does that mean for the Raptors and their place within a conference that could very much be up for grabs, at least if you want to be the runners-up? We'll get into that and more on a Mailbag episode. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, May the 28th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. And you can go and, of course, find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And above all, join us on Discord. The link is in the description of the podcast for the Locked On Raptors Discord server. It's free to join, no cost whatsoever. You just get to join and talk with sickos just like you who love the podcast, who love the Raptors, who want to talk about it at a place that's not Twitter. It's a great place to come hang out. You're welcome to join. And please come armed with better fake trade ideas than the people in there right now. They got terrible ideas. I have to knock them down all the time. Please join and bring better fake trade ideas. We need some fresh blood in the fake trades channel. Okay. Be sure to find the show for free. Where you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. As always, it's much appreciated when you go ahead and do that and support the audio version of the show. You can also go to YouTube if you want to watch the video. You can subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, and when you do that, you'll get a heads up via push notification every single time the show goes live or premieres, so you never miss a second. You can join the live chat, hang out in there. It's a great place to be, so thanks in advance for doing that. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. And we will get started here on a mailbag edition of Locked On Raptors. We've got questions on the offseason to come, free agency, the draft. How do we feel about the strength of the draft now that we've kind of had some more time to steep ourselves in the prospects and all that good jazz? And we've got some wild hypotheticals I'll get into for some fun at the end of the show. But I want to take the first segment just to focus on one question that came in from Mitch Wheeler on Twitter at MitchWheels19. Go follow Mitch. Lovely follow to have. And the question is, outside of the Celtics, who, of course, are in the finals now, boo, gross. The East looks like it could be wide open for the next little bit. Do you think that changes the Raptors' approach in this rebuild/retool? It's a very good question. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with it, right? Like, I guess there's sort of one school of thought that says, well, the Celtics have this sort of vice grip on the conference. Maybe you kind of wait and be patient and kind of wait it out and wait for that team to age out. And then you go and take your shot. I kind of don't subscribe to that idea. I think teams that try to challenge the incumbent, sort of mainstays, super teams, whatever you want to call them, that own a conference at a given time, like I think those teams are often remembered pretty fondly. I think of the Houston Rockets that nearly took down the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, those teams kind of ended in weird ways, but I think those are pretty widely regarded as some of the very best teams to play basketball over the last 15 years or so in the NBA. They just lost to the Golden State Warriors, and that's not like a bad thing or any sort of badge of dishonor. And so I just think there's also the element of, the Raptors benefited from this, right? Like sometimes weirdness happens. Guys get hurt. Untimely injuries take place. Team chemistry falls into disrepair. And all of a sudden you have an opportunity where, oh, wow, we're in the finals, or, oh, wow, we're up 2-1 on the Celtics in the conference finals, and all sorts of things seem possible. Like, I think the NBA is too weird. I think it's too dependent on top-end talent not getting hurt in a league where guys get hurt all the time to sort of punt years and wait for teams to age out. And also there's the element of, well, if one team ages out, some other superpower is probably going to take their place. So I do think in general, you just kind of got to worry about what's going on in your own house, and how that fits into the landscape of a conference or a league is something to be figured out once you've kind of taken care and built the best team possible within your own sort of own plans and independent of what everybody else is doing. Sure, there are some times where you have to build your team sort of designed to take down a particular opponent, but I do think those sort of tweaks and changes and roster upgrades take place at a bit of a later stage than the Raptors even find themselves at right now. The Raptors, I think, are just trying to find some footing, find some competitive grounds, find a way to kind of, slowly but surely add talent to the roster, build up from what they're at now into something that can then be parlayed into something that is even better down the line via, well-timed trades, or, maybe a draft pick really pops in 2-3 years time and your sort of team landscape looks a little bit different. As far as like this offseason and what it means to be in this sort of wide open Eastern Conference, I don't know if it's as wide open as we maybe think it is. I think the Bucks still have something in them. I don't think they're going to be miserable or some sort of play-in or lottery team next season. Like, they still have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who, if he was healthy, may still be playing basketball in the postseason for a Bucks team that, while definitely imperfect, certainly I think posed the best potential chance of taking down the Celtics just because of the individual might of Giannis himself. So I don't think they're going anywhere. Dame is only going to have so much time. Their window may be kind of short because they're a little long in the tooth. And, things like this season can happen to them, right? Where the injury bug hits at the wrong time and all of a sudden their season's a lost cause. Sure, that's there, but I don't think they're just going to sort of pasture or anything like that. I don't think they're done being a competitive team in the Eastern Conference. And I think with some off seasons, a transaction window to kind of address some other issues, maybe swap out some bad players or, misfitting players for better players who fit better, whatever. Like, I think the Bucks can be right back in the mix. I think the Sixers, it seems like the Celtics conference right now, the Sixers have the world in front of them this summer. That doesn't mean they're going to go and succeed at adding a star with their cap space and flexibility. They could very well go and make the wrong move, or maybe the free agent wheel sort of stops and they're sitting there like, oh, wow, we're the odd man out in the musical chairs. And that's a problem, right? Like, that could totally happen. Daryl Morey has a way of just going and procuring talent. I would imagine the Sixers are going to look a lot better than they did this season next year. So they're going to be very much in the mix. And I think a healthy Sixers team absolutely goes toe-to-toe to Boston, toe-to-toe with Boston. And then, beyond that, I mean, the Knicks, I don't think are going anywhere. I think they're going to try and add. I think they'll find ways to use their hoard of picks they still have to make upgrades, even if marginal upgrades on the roster, still upgrades on a roster that was very good and seemed like the most likely team to give Boston a challenge in the conference finals for long stretches of this season. So I don't think it's like super duper wide open. That said, like, there's some attrition in that middle part of the conference that I think you can maybe expect. I think the Heat are going to be worse. It seems like Jimmy Butler might just get traded this summer based on all you hear from the people who are in the know. Like, that's a thing that's on the table. And if the Heat trade Jimmy Butler, I love Bam Adebayo and all of that. And I love the devil magic Eric Spoelstra has just sort of emanating from his fingers. But they're probably going to be a worse team. They're probably gettable in the sort of rankings and the sort of standings of the East. I think they're a team that the Raptors could, in theory, jump next season. The Cavaliers, who the hell knows, right? Like, they could parlay their weird situation into more talent, better fitting talent, and still be a very good top 6 team. But I do think there's a chance they have a setback this next season. And I think the Magic too, like, everyone loves Orlando, and wow, like, the Magic were so incredible this year. These darlings, like, they still can't score, and they need a guard this summer. Like, they absolutely cannot afford to do the Raptors thing from a couple off seasons ago, where it's like, oh, cool, fun young team, had a nice move, run to the 5th seed, and everyone's very happy and surprised. And now we're just going to chill this summer. We're not going to do much to fix what ain't broke, when there's clearly stuff that is broke within their team construct. And I think they got to go out and get themselves a guard, whether that's Donovan Mitchell, whether that's Trae Young, whether that's Darius Garland. Like, there are going to be guards available, but a lot of teams are looking for those guards, right? The Pelicans probably in on one of them, and they have Brandon Ingram to trade in exchange for one of them. You have the Spurs, who seem like they're very much going to be in the mix if a young, talented guard becomes available. There's a chance the Magic, much like the idea of the Sixers kind of being on the wrong end of the musical chairs game, there's a chance they get shut out of the guard game and have to go the Dennis Schroeder route and kind of find like a backup style guy to come and be a stopgap guard for them. And I think that could lead to a setback for them. So I don't think the top ranges of the East are all that much sort of in range for the Raptors. But as far as like kind of positioning and jockeying to try to be in that top 6 range, like I think it's there. Like I think they can get into a 6 seed if everything breaks right next season with the right moves this summer. And I don't know if the state of the East is really going to inform all that much what the Raptors intend to do here. I think it's pretty clear what they want to do. I think they want to try to parlay this flexibility, this cap space they have on hand into some sort of roster upgrade. I don't think they want to go into the tank next season. I think they want to try to be competitive. And if they're not competitive, if things don't work out, then they have the freedom to say, all right, well, we have our pick. It's a good draft. We can sort of pull the plug on it at a certain point. But I do think they're going to go into next season, regardless of the state of the East around them, trying to be reasonably competitive, fighting for the play-in, fighting for a top 6 seed. You know, we've seen teams that no one expected to be top 6 teams making it into the top 6. Like, it happens all the time. It's just the way that the league goes with injuries and attrition and things like that. And so I don't know if I really have answered the question from Mitch here, but I think they're just going to kind of, I think, operate under their own sort of timeline and sort of within their own plans and not worry too much about what's going on, because there's only so much you can control, right? Who knows? Some team out there makes a big trade and all of a sudden they become a true blue contender, and that changes the landscape of the Eastern Conference. I don't think you can really game plan for that stuff. So just take care of what's going on in your own house. I think the Raptors have done a pretty good job of cleaning the slate and kind of hopefully setting themselves up to be in a position where the mistakes of the last couple seasons can be left behind them and no longer kind of hang over the franchise like this big cloud that sort of informs everything they do. It seems like there's a chance to turn the page here. And I do think that, you know, it's just going to be typical Raptors stuff. They're going to, you know, do the draft thing where they sort of don't go for via consensus and pick their guys who they want, and they'll take their guys they want and believe in. You know, standard operating practice for them. I think in the summertime, you know, if there's a big trade out there that they think can upgrade their team, they'll throw their name in the mix because that's what they do. They have a couple extra surplus picks to work with. Maybe there's something there. But for the most part, I think it's going to be kind of a quiet offseason, honestly. You know, we'll see what happens with Bruce and Gary, but I do think that it's just sort of a time to maybe just kind of see what they have and let next year's results kind of inform what the next big moves are going to be. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And again, I don't think the state of the Eastern Conference around them really informs all that much of what they're going to do. We'll come back on the other side and get into some questions about the offseason and what ways in which the Raptors might be able to add via free agency. Are there under the radar free agent pickups that could be had? And of course, the strength of the draft. We've been spending a while now thinking about this draft, which is not as talented as most drafts. How do we feel about where the Raptors sit in their range, 1931? Feeling good about a good player being there? We'll get into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the single best place to go and wager on all the sports you want to wager on. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NFL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. And when you do that, you can go and peruse all the different lines. Obviously, the conference finals still going on the Western Conference side of things. Maybe you think that it's just like a no-brainer, obvious thing that what team is it? The Dallas Mavericks are going to take down the Wolves, complete the sweep tonight, and you think that is just like a clear, obvious. Put the money line; they're going to win. It's academic at this point. The shot making is just too much. If you think that, and you want to get those $150 in bonus bets, why not put some money down on the Mavericks to win tonight? Little $5 bet. And if you do, you get those bonus bets right to your account where you can go and play all sorts of different ways. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Go check them out right now. All right, back at it here on your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors. A reminder, go check out Locked On Sports Today 24/7, our all-day streaming channel on YouTube with Locked On shows running all the live-long day. We have shows on the NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs, the NFL offseason, college transfer portal stuff. It's all there for you. The biggest stories in sports covered by the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network in only the way that the local experts at Locked On can cover their teams. Go check it out 24/7. Just have it on in the background while you work or don't work. I'm not your boss. Go check it out, though. Locked On Sports Today 24/7. Okay, let's continue on with your mailbag questions. A couple about the offseason here. This one comes from Skip to My Lou. Looking back, are you now more excited about this draft and some of the players in our pick range? Yeah, I think I am, because I don't have to pretend to talk myself into any of these guys in the top 10 or so being a Raptor. I think my sort of general feeling about this draft, and again, this is like a thing that people have been saying for ages, it's just not as talented a draft as most years. But I think my biggest concern with it was I just did not trust, as far as I could throw them, any of the guys who might have been there for the Raptors at 6, in the top 4 if they moved up. I just did not feel like the return on investment for a top 6 pick was going to be what you typically expect to be for a top 6 pick. I think picking at 19 and 31 is like a perfect place to be in this draft. This is a role player draft. This is a draft that is kind of flat, but deep in guys who should probably play a good handful of years in the NBA, and in many cases provide like winning basketball when they do it because of their sort of connective abilities. They're sort of not, you're not getting like heavy creation guys or anything like that in this draft. It's a lot of guys who are going to fill the gaps, and I think that's what this Raptors team really needs right now. It's not to say you can't use more talent, and obviously they'll continue to explore avenues to add it, but they seem pretty hell-bent on Scottie Barnes and Emmanuel Quickley being their two pillars going forward. RJ Barrett certainly part of that mix as well. And I think that's a perfectly fine place to be and a perfectly fine bet to make, considering what we just saw from Scottie Barnes last season in his third year, the jump he took, the signs of stardom that were sprinkled all throughout it. It's really encouraging stuff. I'm also, again, people know I'm super bullish on Emmanuel Quickley being something close to an all-star at his peak, if not a full-on, fully fledged all-star. I think he's very good. And I think the pick and roll sort of creation and just like the general point guard stuff that Emmanuel Quickley does came so quickly and naturally to him upon getting the lead guard mantle with the Raptors that I'm only more encouraged and bullish on Quickley after having seen him for half a season with the Raptors than I was even before, when I was clamoring for the Raptors to go and trade for the guy. And so, yeah, I think because of what they already have in house and the way the team is built, I think finding connective pieces, whether it's a rotation big, someone who can offer them a little bit more sort of stylistic versatility defensively, would be a wonderful thing. Obviously I've been big pounding the drum. Give me some connective wings who can elongate the Raptors lineups, give them lineup versatility, give them the ability to not have RJ Barrett be their sort of de facto main shutdown wing guy, because that is just not something he figures to be good at. And so, yeah, I think where they're at, 19 and 31, great place to be. Have no issues with where they are in that range of the draft. My big concern was the whole, deferring the pick again, not having all your picks available in the summertime or in future years, just, the opportunity cost of not having your picks available, and just sort of the general lack of enthusiasm I have for a lot of the guys at the top of this draft. My real sort of hang up was it's better if they don't pick up there with that pick, and it's better for the long-term future if they just defer it to the Spurs this year, which they're doing, or convey it, whatever the word is. But and so, yeah, now 19 and 31 in this draft, happy as a clam, perfect place to be. They probably are going to get themselves a role player or two, and I think that's a very, very nice thing. And there's also guys you can make the crazy upside swings on too, where there's maybe star talent hidden in an Ulrich Shamshay or something like that, or a Keyshawn George who's younger than a lot of the other wing types in this draft. Like that, there's upside to be had here as well. And so maybe you can have your cake and eat it too at 19 and 31, where you draft maybe one guy is more of a sort of, all right, this guy's going to be kind of a high floor, low ceiling role player. And then you can maybe make the high upside swing on someone else. There's optionality to having both of these picks that I think is makes it a pretty good spot to be. Not to mention, and this has been mentioned a couple times in the Locked On Raptors Discord, but the idea of having pick 31, which is the first pick of the second round, now that the second round is going to be on a whole new day in the NBA draft, like they kind of control the board there for the second round a little bit. And I'm curious to see, like, I don't think we can have any sort of inkling of how it's all going to work out, because it's the first time this has happened. We don't know what it's going to mean to quote unquote control the board for the second round, but it can't be a bad thing, I would think. And so, yeah, I'm pretty cool with where the Raptors are at draft pick range wise and all of that. Even though this draft at the top is very not exciting. Let's get to the next one here. This one comes from Stago. Do you have any under the radar free agents you want to target with the MLE if we go the cap space route? Look, man, The free agent class is pretty grim this offseason. And I do think I'm coming around on the idea of more status quo than anything. I think retaining Bruce Brown into the season is not a bad thing. I think you can find a way to deal him at the deadline if you really have to, or you just get the salary relief in a year's time when he's off the books. I think he can be a helpful player to the basketball team. He was injured, from all reports. He had something going on with his knee down the stretch of the season and was playing on a team that had no identity, no good players available for long stretches, like not exactly the right context to accentuate what Bruce Brown does well. I think his raw numbers were actually pretty solid. The last month and a half or so, 11, 4, and 4 on well above average true shooting, pretty good 3-point shooting. Like there's a useful player in Bruce Brown. And if you just bring him back in Gary Trent Jr. and use the mid-level exception and your 2 draft picks as sort of your main vehicles to adding to this team for next year, I think that's a perfectly fine way to go about it. And again, it kind of going back to the first segment, it allows you to just kind of see what you have without making any big, boisterous, enormous moves before you kind of know what's going on. And so, yeah, as far as the free agents, yeah, I'm not looking at anyone who's going to require cap space to sign because I just think I've said it before, man. Some of the best free agent deals are the ones you don't sign. And I think this is a perfect class for overpaying in response to playoff overperformance or overpaying just because you have the money and there's guys out there and it's not a very deep talent pool. So you kind of got to be in a bidding wars for these guys. I just kind of think sitting out this not very strong free agent class is kind of the move for this Raptors team right now. And using the mid-level exception and their draft picks as their main ways of adding to the team, I think is perfectly fine. So on the mid-level exception side of things, I think a couple of guys come to mind. Obviously, the positions that we're talking about this team needing to address via the draft, via free agency, whatever it might be, is a third big, a rotation big who can fill in with Jakob Poeltl and Kelly Olynyk, preferably someone with some stylistic versatility to their game, some switchability, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about that a million times. Some wings, more wings. Give me some wings to fill out some lineups, please. Give me some length. Give me some wing defense, et cetera. And then a backup point guard, I think, is kind of the third thing they need. And you can do that. Like you could split up the mid-level exception between a couple of guys if you wanted to. A couple of guys who come to mind. I've always been a big Monte Morris guy. I think as like a ninth man backup point guard type, perfectly cromulent, would be totally fine with him in there, and probably doesn't take the full mid-level exception. You can then use the other chunk of your mid-level exception. If Morris costs $6 or $7 million, you can use the other $6 or $7 million left over for a guy like Goga Bitadze. I think he's the guy who comes to mind most. Really nice play this season for the Magic when he had to fill in for Wendell Carter Jr. when he was out. Obviously a loaded front court there, so there wasn't a ton of playing time and not a lot of like raw production for Bitadze there, but was a very useful player and I think showed that there's like a little bit of defensive juice in him. I would not mind if he was a guy they targeted with a chunk of their mid-level to just fill out that backup big spot. Maybe they still draft a big. Maybe that's where you kind of go more project-y. Maybe you take an Yves Missi or a Khalil Ware in that spot, who's maybe going to take a couple years to refine into something. Or Shamshay also comes to mind. If you're looking at centers to kind of take some time with, Bitadze could be a nice stopgap third big. He's kind of the one that comes to mind for me among the wing types. If you're going among the big types, that is. I mentioned for the guard situation, I think Monte Morris is like perfectly fine. Cameron Payne, I guess, would be fine too. Like you don't got to get crazy with a backup guard. Like there's going to be a lot of sort of playmaking from unorthodox spots on this roster, so I don't think it's like the biggest necessity or anything like that. But getting someone in there who can dribble the ball and kind of run an offense, even with just the second unit, I think would be a pretty decent thing to do. As far as sort of under the radar restricted free agents, let's just say for argument's sake, they do go the cap space route, which I don't think is the way to kind of maximize how much you can add to this team this summer. But say they go the cap space route and they want to go and try to find someone either an unrestricted free agency or RFA. I think RFA is probably more likely just because there's not that many good UFAs, and those guys are probably going to want to go elsewhere where there's more opportunity. Malik Monk maybe being the one exception. I could get on board with Malik Monk just as a talent play, although I think there's a chance that his next contract is a bit of an overpay as well. Even with the cap going up, I just think the fit with the Raptors, sort of locking yourself into the team that you would have with Malik Monk, maybe not my favorite move. But if you're going and looking at guys who are RFAs, someone you can throw an offer sheet at and maybe convince a team to not match, I think Isaac Okoro comes to mind. Obviously offers wing defense in spades, very, very good positional or point of attack defender, et cetera, et cetera. And no one cares that he shoots threes. Like, defenses do not give a single worry or care in the world if Isaac Okoro is wide open for three, but he hit a bunch of his threes this year. He was at like 40%. If he can replicate that, eventually teams will have to care about him on defense. And, that changes the shape of your team. If you can throw Isaac Okoro, 4 years, 60, is that too much? I don't know. Like, this is the thing. When you do RFA stuff, you got to create a deal that is unfavorable for the other team to match. And that often means it's unfavorable to you as well. And so I'm not like super keen on the idea, but if there is a single RFA out there, Patrick Williams, we've talked about a little bit. He's fine. I'm not super keen on him. Isaac Okoro, not super keen, but he might be the best guy you could go out there as like an under the radar RFA guy to throw some money at. But yeah, it's a grim scene. The free agent class being what it is why I'm kind of team status quo at this point until further notice. And I can change my mind on that whenever I want. It's my damn podcast. We'll come back on the other side. We will round it out with a couple more questions regarding wild, ridiculous hypotheticals. My favorite thing to entertain in the offseason. We will get to that coming up in just 1 second. All right, back at it here, closing things out on your Tuesday edition of Locked On Raptors, doing a little mailbag action, and got a couple of questions that are just like fun, stupid hypotheticals. Great stuff for the offseason. Let's get into this one here from Psychic asking, strange question. What non-title contending team would Scottie Barnes turn into a title favorite? I love this question because it kind of breaks my brain. And I have like kind of a troll answer that I want to throw out there because I think it's hilarious. And it's the Indiana Pacers. Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, pull-up shooting guard could be pretty darn fun in my estimation. Maybe that takes away some of the stuff that makes the Pacers really good, but I don't know. You got a little Halliburton out there, Nembhard, Miles Turner, Siakam, Barnes. That's a damn good team and a team that makes me want to cry thinking about it even existing. So I'm going to move on from that one before I get too sad. You probably got to go to the Western Conference. I don't know if there's a ton of teams in the East where Scottie Barnes is just like an easy guy to drop into to make them awesome. And this is the challenge with Scottie Barnes a little bit, is he's like kind of a particular player to build around. It's not a bad thing. He does a lot of really interesting things you can play off of, but his three-point shooting is not a guarantee right now. I think there were very encouraging signs last season, but I think his three-point shooting more looks like the functional sort of catch-and-shoot stuff. I don't think there's going to be a ton of pull-up to his game. Would love to be wrong, but, it's a really, really difficult thing to add in, and he's just never had success as a pull-up three-point shooter. So I think it's going to be kind of standstill catch-and-shoot stuff, and for him to really benefit from taking those shots, like there's got to be someone to create stuff for him as well. And so you got to bake that in here. That's why I think the fit with him and Emmanuel Quickley is really nice. I think Quickley and Barnes, if they can kind of get that two-man game going a little more effectively, like there's a real chance that Scottie Barnes or that Quickley helps Barnes kind of get back to where he was at the start of last season when he was banging threes, a lot of which came as a result of wonderful things Pascal Siakam was doing with the ball. We go over to the Western Conference. I think a really interesting one is the Sacramento Kings. I think there's potentially a lot of overlap there between him and Domantas Sabonis, and so it's not perfect by any means. I think the sort of playmaking hub from the elbows, having two of those guys, like it's nice for staggering minutes and surviving when the other one sits, but I still think the Kings were like an OG and an OB away from being pretty incredible. It's a shame they couldn't get in on that one because like a Fox, Murray, and an OB, a Sabonis group is a ton of fun. That's a tricky one. I think, he'd be pretty awesome on the Nuggets. So that's not to say they're not a title contender because they are a title contender, but he'd be really fun on the Nuggets. And I guess like the Thunder too, any of these teams, right? Any really good team, you add excellent Scottie Barnes to them, they're going to be even better and more title worthy. But the Thunder, I think in particular, if you had Scottie Barnes playing the four on that team, offering some help side rim protection, playing just kind of being bigger and beefier than Jalen Williams or Lou Dort are. And not to mention kind of offering a guy who, he's not an incredible three-point shooter, but if teams are going to leave him wide open to shoot threes, Like, I think he can burn them. We've seen that. Like, he was a pretty good catch and shoot guy on wide open stuff this season. I think him and Shea would have a really fun 2-man game. Like, it might be tricky spacing wise. It might not be perfect, but playing next to Chet Holmgren, I think Scottie Barnes would be pretty damn awesome. So the Thunder might be the answer right now. The Thunder need someone of that size, of that sort of stature, to kind of tie things together, I think, and give them a little bit more beef. I don't think they actually need like a big, I think the sort of, it's been a misdiagnosis of the Thunder to say, oh, they need some more beef. They need to move Chet Holmgren to the 4. Like, no, he was fine at the 5. They need someone who's taller than 6'5" on the wing. And I think, and someone who is not Josh Giddey, someone who can help complete those lineups with that 5th guy who makes that sort of core 4 of theirs really, really sing. And so, yeah. And also, like, having Scottie Barnes maybe makes it more viable to not play Lou Dort a ton. You can work in more Isaiah Joe to add the spacing, or Aaron Wiggins or whatever. So, yeah, the Thunder might be my answer. Thankfully, he's not going to be on the Thunder, because that would really, really make me sad and irritate me. Next question here comes from Muggsy, asking if the NBA were to place an expansion franchise in Canada in the near future, what would be the most likely location? Try Vancouver again. Montreal, not only a world-renowned city, but loves its basketball. Edmonton has showed a lot of love for basketball as well, between the NBA and WNBA, and of course the CEBL on top of that. A great question. I don't think there's going to be another expansion team in Canada, because I frankly don't think the Raptors would allow it at this point. I'm not sure if they have like veto power over it or anything like that, but I think this is quite a wild hypothetical, because I just don't see it. I think they're going to focus on Seattle and Vegas first, and then do you need more than 32 teams? You probably don't. We don't got to dilute stuff even more. We don't need to be MLS over here. When it comes to what city it would be, like, I think Montreal is my pick. Probably even less likely to be allowed by Toronto. But I think, with the NBA seemingly having eyes back for Seattle, the Blazers are there. I just wonder if Vancouver, like, do you want to have 3 Pacific Northwest teams again? Did it really work? As I'm not saying Vancouver can't work as an NBA city. They had really bad ownership and really kind of botched their early franchise draft picks and maneuvers and stuff like that. I think they could certainly have a better, more fair shot at it, given another chance. But I think Montreal is the answer. I think it would kind of have like a bit of an interesting edge, kind of luring European players, I think, just because it is more of a European flavor city and all of that. Obviously, the weather is not perfect or anything like that, but I think Montreal would be kind of an incredible NBA city, honestly. I think it would be pretty fantastic. Edmonton, I think, is a hard no. I think it's basically just like, and this is nothing against our friends who live in Edmonton, but like, it would instantly become that market that everyone, whenever a good player is on that team, everyone in the world goes, well, when's that player leaving Edmonton and going to X glamour market? I think it would just kind of be stuck in that perpetual cycle. And I don't know if it really kind of has enough juice to be an NBA city. Maybe it does. And I think it would probably, be far enough from Toronto that, that, the sort of powers that be at MLSC wouldn't be too much of making a stink about it. But yeah, I think Montreal to me is the clear city. Like, that city is a killer basketball town. It's a great sports town when their teams are doing well. Obviously the Habs draw incredibly well no matter what. And I think just given the right sort of chance to start out and not be sort of a doormat franchise right out of the gate, for like a super long, prolonged period, I think Montreal would be a pretty amazing NBA market. And the rivalry between Toronto and Montreal would be absolutely incredible. It's never going to happen. We can wish, we can hope, but that's why we answer hypotheticals here on the podcast. Last one here. This one comes from JD Young. Go listen to Locked On Sharks, by the way, hosted by your friend JD Young on the Locked On NHL side of things. The question, sliding doors moment. What happens if Kawhi's shot doesn't go in against the 76ers? Entertaining the worst of all hypotheticals. That shot is like a top 5 sports experience of my entire life. Probably top 3 or 2. It's unbelievable. It's the greatest. Never want to live in a world where it doesn't happen. Never want to live in a world where JJ Redick doesn't have to think about it in every podcast he's ever asked about it, and all of that. I think for me, it probably means they kind of sell in that summer, right? Like, if Kawhi and those Raptors lose in round 2, that team was kind of built to be torn apart. Kyle Lowry probably goes away, and that just kind of ends that summer. I think he had 1 year left on his deal at that point. I think they probably trade him. I think you probably move on from Gasol and Ibaka a year early, and you really kind of reorient things around the Siakam, Van Vliet, and Anunoby trio. And, they're probably not very good the following season just because those guys weren't quite ready. And Kyle Lowry was obviously such a key cog in that 2019-20 season, which is, for my money, the most uproariously joyful Raptors season of all time. The sort of flipping the bird to the whole league after winning the title season with no Kawhi. It was an absolute delight. I'm really glad this didn't happen because we wouldn't have had that season the way it did, the way it played out, if Kawhi did not hit that shot and the Raptors lose in Game 7 to Philly. But yeah, I think, the other hypothetical here is Kawhi misses that shot and they just like find a way to win in overtime and everyone's fine and everything moves on and they go and win the championship. But that's no fun. That's not fun to think about. And they probably were going to lose in that overtime because they looked absolutely cooked. But I think, a lot of sadness and despair and prematurely breaking apart a team that had ended up having a really, really fun season in it still, if the Raptors do not win that Game 7 against the Sixers with the Kawhi shot. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for sending in questions, to those of you who did. And we will be back again tomorrow. Katie Heindel will be along. We'll figure out what to talk about. It'll be a Katie episode. Who knows? It can go anywhere. And that's the best part of Katie episodes. We will have some more draft stuff later this week. Jamar Hines will be along as well. And we're moving into June here, man. It's very exciting. The draft, the trades, it's all coming to us. So much slop. Very much looking forward to it. And you can keep up with it, of course, by following, subscribing, rating, reviewing on your podcast app of choice. On the audio side of things, go to YouTube and subscribe over there. Always appreciated very much when you support the show, however you support the show. And we will leave it there. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. I left my ball on the floor. Give me 1 sec for those who really watch me shoot. Oh, no, I'm hurting myself. This sucks. All right, here we go. Please hit this. Bye.